I want to dedicate today's class in loving memory of a good friend of Torch, a good friend of mine personally. Maybe y'all know him. He's a leader in the Jewish community. His name is Steve Rudolph. He passed away tragically yesterday in an accident. He was riding his motorcycle back from shul, from Bet Yeshurun, and a drunk driver hit him and killed him. Really, really disastrous. And of course, it's just terrifying, the fact that you could be in shul one day and you're young and you're vibrant and maybe you're in your 40s or 50s and then just before you know it, you moved on to a different world. He was a very good friend of Torch. He came to a lot of classes, but he was also like an active leader. I think he'd be an inspiration. And I was thinking, I realized this last night, that last time I spoke about this topic, Steve has a chavura, or had a chavura of Jewish community in Sugarland, and they meet once a month, and they have a rabbi come speak to them. So he asked me if I could come speak to them, and it was right before Purim this year. So I said sure, and I went there and I spoke on this topic. It was a Purim-centric discussion, but it covered a lot of what we're going to cover today. And I think it's kind of fitting that we're going to dedicate the class today on the same issue that I spoke about at his collection of Jews coming to study Torah. And I think it would be inspiration for us, the fact that even as lay people that don't have advanced degrees in rabbinics or in Judaics, we could still do our part in trying to proliferate Torah and have people come together and be contributors towards increasing Jewish learning and Jewish affiliation and Jewish vibrancy and Jewish synagogue membership, etc., etc. Okay, so I want to give a little introduction to the topic, which I know I certainly didn't do last time. And I think, I don't know if you guys saw the story, but I think this week, one of the last nails in the coffin of the idea that the theory of evolution can be a total replacement to God in explaining the origin of species. This is an idea that has been very popular and really the norm in the scientific world and in the world of scholarship, and certainly the sciences. And of course, it treaded into the theological world as well. That we finally found a way, or another alternative, to take God out of the equation, and now we can explain everything without the hand of any sort of intelligent guide. This week, there came a story. It was a study that vastly changed the estimate of how many species exist in the world. Previously, the numbers that I saw were anywhere between 1.25 million different distinct species, up to a high of 8.7 million species. And this week, a study was published wherein that number was changed, not from the millions nor the billions, but even as high as 1 trillion different distinct species in this planet. A number so vast, and many of them being single-cell organisms that kind of have to develop on their own, can't develop from some other single-celled organisms, that really make the argument of, trying to plot out how this all happens without God really preposterous. And as an aside, I think that there's always going to be an alternative. The Almighty created the world in a way where there's a possibility always to reject God. If it's very unnatural for God to come and give us prophecy and do miracles and remove all doubt that we could possibly have. Because you remove all doubt, you remove free will. You remove free will, well, then there's no purpose. If you cannot reject God, then accepting God really has no value. So there has to always be some sort of possibility to say that, well, no, it's not necessary, or, well, it's not logical, or whatever, or religion kills more people, or the more wars fought over religion, which doesn't disprove anything, just like say, the second most common reason for wars is religion. The first is about territory, so maybe we shouldn't live anywhere, right? The fact that more people die in wars because of fights over territory doesn't mean we should try to live in the moon, right? We all still live here, and that maybe indeed proves the importance of it. Like but it's an argument that you hear all the time, even though it doesn't make any sense logically. The legitimacy of the argument of religion or God has to be based on its own merits, not the fact that some people use it for nefarious things. But either way, there always is going to be a replacement, and for the past 150 years, the idea of evolution really filled those roles. And I think today that's becoming more and more infeasible. My theory is that the next kind of frontier of alternatives to accepting God and all that implies is going to be the question of attention. We live in a world, especially with young people, where they don't really have gaps in their attention. Besides for taking showers, it's like I told someone this recently. I said, thankfully we have Shabbos with no cell phones. Otherwise, when would we ever be by ourselves? Besides for the shower, that's it. We have showers and Shabboses. That's all we have. Because otherwise, if there's never a break, if you go from thing to thing, right, and you see people by. I'm sorry if I'm going into one of those rants, but you see people by the stop sign. They're waiting for the light, and boom, they're all on the phone, right? So there really is never a time where people can even stop and consider and ponder and probe and explore and analyze and let their mind kind of examine and weigh the options and ask the critical questions about what life is all about. If there's never an attention, well, then that question is never debated. And if it's never debated properly, and if it's not debated properly, okay, we have an alternative. Don't ask, don't tell, don't pursue. But either way, all this is a way of trying to look at the legacy of evolution, because the one of the core ideas is that the world is constantly improving. We go from less developed to more complex, right? We go from more primordial, more primitive, to more developed, to more sophisticated over time. Now, this idea kind of goes from like a molecular level as well, but also to sophistication of people. We look at ourselves, or society tends to look at ourselves today as being more moral and being more sophisticated and being more intellectually aware and more developed than the barbarians that lived thousands of years. To a certain degree, that's of course true. Of course, we have the idea of tikkun olam and the idea of Mashiach and the idea of progress. That is always, even in the Jewish perspective, that is always an idea of we have a broken world and we're here to fix it, and we fix it progressively, right? The more we fix, the better it gets, and that's indeed true. But Judaism has an idea that the individuals and the ideas of yesteryear are much grander than the ideas that we have today. The capacity, the spiritual capacity of the souls of Sinai and the preceding generations, it gets progressively less potent and less capable. As an example, the idea of us producing another Maimonides is, we spent time, of course, studying his impact, but that, of course, to us is unimaginable, because he comes from a variety of people that are 1,000 years closer to Sinai. You're closer to Sinai, and means you're less distant not only in time, but also in ideology, in perspective, in behavior. In this vein, we understand the reverence that we pay to the ancient books, of course. It's bizarre. You ask people, how is it possible the most influential book that the Jews have is 3,500 years ago? Wouldn't that be updated? Can't we improve with modern technology? Yeah? Let's scrap out the theories and retest it. And the answer is, yeah, that's not the way we work. We look at the Torah as being the best document and the original document, and us still paying it the same reverence. And the Talmud, how many man hours are spent studying Talmud in the Jewish world? an enormous amount of human capital because we value that much more than the books that were published afterwards. And to people in the greater society, that seems bizarre. That seems like it's outdated, it's obsolete. And what is new is better, and what is new is more correct, and what is new is removing mistakes that we may have had prior. And I think a good way, this is a very long introduction, but a good way to kind of look at how we can find truth in books that are so old, in areas that are particularly perplexing and vexing to our society, kind of brings this point home. I think today we're going to talk about love. We're going to talk about what the Torah says about that specifically and kind of how that plays out for us today. I can think of, maybe this is the best example of where today our society, our world really doesn't really have a clue of how to navigate this foundational element of human life. We see people getting married and divorced at alarming numbers. We see people having, relationships go south even beyond the percentages that end up in severing it entirely. There are those that just are so miserable, and it causes so much pain and suffering, not only to the people involved, but to the children and all the other collateral damage that happens, and the divorce lawyers, and it's so pervasive in our society. And the question is, why, if we're so advanced and so sophisticated, and we finally figure out everything else, how come this is so confusing to us? And then when we look at what the Torah says, and it seems so different, it's so such out of the box thinking. And then when we try to explicate that, and we delve into it, and we examine and we probe, we find insights that really could radically alter our thinking and is in direct opposition to what society today says. And it becomes clear that, we can look back, and we can look back at the Torah, and ideas that are thousands of years old that are ever relevant as they ever were today. That's the introduction. I don't think I said that last time. Okay, so what does the Torah say about love? So we find something very bizarre, just at first glance. We find in the book of Leviticus, in fact, we're going to read it next week. It says as follows: do not take revenge. And then it gives another word for revenge. It's two different kinds of revenge against the people of your nation. You should love your fellow as yourself. I am God. And this, of course, is very famous, even in the general population. This was, like many other things, plagiarized by other religions. But we're told that this is a mitzvah in the Torah, wherein we're commanded to love everyone as ourselves. Of course, this, just on first glance, seems like a very difficult mitzvah to fulfill. Healthy people love themselves a lot. They love themselves perhaps more than anyone else in the world. Healthy people, from day one, are always looking to improve their situation. They feel their own pain. They're looking for their own betterment, for their own improvement. And then we're told those associations, that emotion, that positive feeling that you have to yourself, you have to give to everyone else. And that, of course, how do we do that? How can we possibly, is this metaphoric? And indeed, that's not the only time that we're told to love someone or something. We're told, this is from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 10, we have to love the convert, or the foreigner. The word convert and foreigner in Hebrew is the same word, ger. Why? Because you, Jewish people, were foreigners in the land of Egypt. So someone converts, we've got to love that person as well. And lastly, in the book of Deuteronomy as well, very famous verse, Ve'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha, you have to love the Almighty God with all your hearts, with all your soul, and with all your resources. Thus, we are commanded to love our fellow as ourselves. We're commanded to love the convert, because we too were foreigners in the land of Egypt, and we're commanded to love God with all our hearts, which the Talmud tells us means we have two hearts, multiple hearts. We have the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Ra, the good and evil inclination. With all our soul, even if it means giving up our life, with all our resources, we have to love God. Now, mitzvahs, right? The definition of the word mitzvah, or the translation of the word mitzvah, has been corrupted, I would say, a little bit in today's society, because we think of it as a good thing. Mitzvah, of course, is a good thing, but if you want to translate from Hebrew, the word mitzvah, or tzivu, it means instruction, commandment. We have hundreds of commandments in the Torah, and 3 of them are commandments to have emotions, an emotion of love towards our fellow man, towards the convert, and towards God. Now, these mitzvahs are not optional. It's not like we opt in. Love whomever you want, love those people that you want to love, and you don't have to be that loving to people that you have a hard time getting along with. That's not what it says. And in fact, to contend that these are optional would be inappropriate, because we know that these are central themes in our religion. Rabbi Akiva famously says, "Ve'ahavta l'rach kamocha, zeh klal gadol b'Torah." You should love your fellow as yourself. This is a foundational, fundamental principle of Torah. Additionally, we're told in the Talmud in Shabbos 31a that the convert, or the potential convert, who comes, the Gentile, comes to Hillel and says to him, Hillel, teach me all of Torah while I'm standing on one leg. And he says to him, I'll teach you all of Torah while standing on one leg. No problem. That you dislike, don't do to others, which is a play on the same idea. That you don't like, don't do to others. That is Torah. Everything else is commentary. So we're told, this is not only a truthism about Torah, this is a central point about Torah. To say that this is some sort of, it's some sort of metaphor, some sort of idea that, that's supposed to be there, but not really. It's a trope. There's no tropes in Torah. This is a halacha. This is a mitzvah. And it seems, face value to be a bit unreasonable to expect. The Torah obviously is going to ask of us things that are things we can fulfill, and this, to us, seems very difficult to fulfill. How are we going to fulfill this? Love everyone as ourselves. Maybe you love your spouse, your children, your neighbor. Well, it depends which neighbor. But it seems like it's a lot to ask of us. What about loving God? We have a hard time even understanding what God even means. If we were to have a class in Jewish theology, it would be a very knotty subject. But why? Because it's not clear. Again, God is beyond our comprehension. While we can prove the existence of God, as to exactly defining what that is, by definition, is going to be something that's very hard for us to define, because the idea of God is an idea that is not bound by the same constraints and the same physics that dominate our world. So having a definition for this idea is difficult, yet we're commanded to love God, to have an emotion. And not only that, this is one of the 6 constant mitzvahs. This is one of the endgame mitzvahs. There are 6 mitzvahs that are the purpose of all the mitzvahs to bring us towards loving God is one of them. And it's one of the 2 ways that we relate to God. It's one of the 2 ways, one of the 2 modes of relationship that we can have with God is one, love God or fear God. So it's a central part of our religion. So to say that these things are kind of metaphoric or they're not literal is, it's likely a mistake. Now, I think if we were going to enumerate the questions, we would say like this. Number 1, how is it fair? How is it possible to command love, to command an emotion? If I say, hey, put on tefillin. Okay, what tefillin? You get tefillin, you put them on. But erect a mezuzah in your door. Fine, you get a mezuzah, you buy the mezuzah, you put it up, you're done. Shake a lulav, eat matzah, right? Light your menorah, whatever it is. These are actions. To have an emotion, that seems to be, how do I say like this, don't like that? Now, as an aside, our society does tell that as well. There are certain emotions that in today's society we cannot have. There's some things which are inappropriate. Even though, what if I feel like that? Well, you can't feel like that. Yet our society kind of determines what falls into that category and what doesn't.
But isn't the Lord,
I'm sorry?
let's say, pederastic, you could feel that way. No one can tell you not to feel that way, but you can't act on it.
I would agree. Like anger, you could be angry as long as you don't display the anger, right? You could want to sin as long as you don't sin. And in fact, that's a mitzvah to restrain yourself. And commonly, some people will make the argument, and I've heard this argument every time I've spoken about this, I've heard the same argument. Well, maybe the Torah says, when the Torah says, love your fellow, it means behave towards him with love, him or her with love. And that would, I think that would be true as well, of course. But that's not the simple understanding of that. That's a little bit of an elaboration that we don't have. And in fact, there are a lot of other mitzvahs that talk about actions, behaviors of love towards your fellow. We're told in Torah, someone comes to borrow money, you have to lend them money. If you have the capacity to. We have mitzvahs of kindness. Like these are actions of love, and this seems to be beyond that. It seems to have an emotion. Okay, so that's where we're going to get to. I think what's clear is the Torah is telling us is that this is a learnable skill. There's some sort of formula that we can follow to get there. And the question is, what is that? How do we, dig into the mechanics of what determines the feelings that we have towards other people, the feelings we have towards converts, towards God? How can we manipulate that? Because remember, if you can manipulate that, then this entire world that is so that is so difficult for us to get right, maybe we can fix that as well. So it means the benefit of learning this formula is beyond the mitzvah. The mitzvah is maybe what we're obligated to do, but once we learn this skill, we'll see how it can really change our lives, our relationships, and not only that, it can have very far-reaching effects in the entirety of our life.
You kind of already do it, like with your spouse. I know that sometimes they don't do what you like them to do, or you don't agree with them, but you still choose.
That's true, and
you love that one person.
That's true. Hopefully, you're right that with our spouse, this also is.
It's kind of like somewhat the formula of knowing how to love.
I agree, but unfortunately, the facts are that a lot of people maybe don't exactly follow the formula, or maybe don't know what the formula is, or maybe they know they need to love them, but they don't love them, and they hate them, and they want to get divorced.
Yeah.
So that happens a lot. It's just a fact. It's very disturbing to talk about it, but it's a fact. And if we knew a formula to avoid that, our lives and our marriages and our relationships can be improved, I think.
Well, there's some psychology experiments that show that if you pretend an emotion,
you'll get there. Fake it till you make it.
And I know there's one with smiling, where somebody who's not happy is told to smile. And just the smile lifts their mood and makes them happier.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. So yeah, I would agree to that as well, of course, that we could do things to artificially kind of engender certain feelings. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's see. I agree. Let's dig into here a little bit. So what's a few issues that need to be addressed off the top? We're told to love your fellow as yourself. So if I love myself, 55 units of love, I have to love everyone else and also 55 units of love. There's one problem with that. Well, there's a few problems with that. First of all, that does seem a little bit unrealistic, right? It's we love ourselves a lot. The majority of our lives is trying to improve our status, our in whatever field, and to tell that we should look out for someone else as much as we look out for ourselves, that seems a little bit difficult. Number one. Number two, the Talmud makes it very clear. Jewish law makes it very clear that if I have a bottle of water, for example, this is the case where the Talmud brings it down. I got one bottle of water, and we're in the desert. Whoever drinks the bottle of water survives. I'm working with my fellow. So if I love him as myself, then maybe I should give it to him and let him survive. Talmud makes it clear, chayecha kodmin, which means your life supersedes his life. Well, if it's equal, shouldn't it be equal? Then maybe it should be a coin flip. Or maybe I should give it to the other guy, because that's the mitzvah. But we're told that, you have to save yourself before you save someone else. Kind of like they do in the airplanes, right? Put the mask on yourself before helping someone else, right? I guess there is one area of contemporary life where they are invoking something from yesteryear.
But that's only so that you
should be disoriented, of course, yeah.
Exactly.
But either way, if my life supersedes someone else, can we really say that I love me and my fellow as much? So I think that we're going to do this a lot today, but we're going to look at what does it mean as yourself. As yourself does not necessarily mean with the same quantity as yourself. Rather, it could potentially mean with the same quality, the same method of love, the same feelings of love that you have that are not based upon a commandment to do so. So, for example, I say, okay, see this guy? He's not the most put together. Love him. Take care of him. So what do you say? Well, it's a mitzvah to do it. So I'm going to fulfill a mitzvah of the Almighty. I'm going to love him. I can't stand him, but I don't love him anyhow. Well, do we love ourselves because it's a mitzvah to love ourselves? Did anyone tell us as a child, when you don't get the ice cream, you are instructed to scream till you get it? No. The child naturally loves themselves. It's trying to do the best and acquire the most and the best, right? They love themselves. Not because anyone told them to love themselves, but because they just have an emotion of love towards themselves. The Torah, let's say the Torah told us, love your fellow. What would you say? Okay, here's my tzitzis, and here's my tefillin. This is a mitzvah. I'll love him. I'll clench my nose and I'll love him. Torah says, no. Love him as yourself. What we need to achieve is that you love him, not as much as yourself, but in the same manner that you love yourself. Not because you were instructed to do so, not because it's some sort of mitzvah, not because you're fulfilling some sort of religious function to love yourself. No, you have to love him, just love him. And of course, this makes our task even more difficult. How are we going to achieve an emotion of love towards someone, and it's not like we could say we're doing something, we're doing X, and that fulfills our obligations. We have to actually get to the feeling, the emotional feeling that we feel love towards that person. How do we do that? And not only that, we're told to love the convert, but doesn't the convert already fall into the first category? Love the fellow as yourself? That's a good question. There seems to be a redundant. Yeah, it seems to be redundant. It seems redundant, right? You already love everyone, so of course the convert would be included in that. So let's try to give some answers. We got a lot of questions now. Let's try to give some answers. Let's look at the first time love is mentioned in the Torah, because maybe this can shine the light, this can open the window onto what the Torah thinks love is, and thus how can we do what the Torah wants us to do. And of course, the benefits will extend to our life here today as well. So the first time that there is a mention of someone loving someone else in the Torah is in the budding love life of Isaac and Rebekah. Abraham instructs his slave Eliezer to go east to his family to find a spouse for Isaac. He goes and he meets Rebekah, of course the whole story with the camels, the whole deal. He has to negotiate with the family. They agree to send Rebekah back west to Israel. She's traveling. He has all the camels. She meets Isaac and she falls off the camel. He really, he was shocking, or he was so wonderful that she was so excited. However you want to interpret that. Either way, and then it says as follows. This is a verse from Genesis. I think it's chapter 24. I don't have written down where exactly it is. And Isaac brought her to the tent of Sarah, his mother. Remember, Sarah had died a little bit prior. And he married Rebekah, and she became to him a wife. And he loved her. And he was consoled after his mother. So if you examine this verse, you'll find something very interesting. So we're describing the marriage and the love of Isaac and Rebekah, and we are invoking Sarah multiple times. And Isaac brought Rebekah, to the tent of Sarah, his mother. He married her. She became a wife for him. He loved her. And he was consoled. He was finally consoled after the tragedy of the death of his mother. And the question is, why are we talking about his mother so much? This is like the intrusive mother-in-law. I have in my notes here, like a few mother-in-law jokes in case it wasn't going so well, but I think it's going fine. So what's going on here? Like, why is Sarah playing such a pivotal role? She's been dead for a couple of years now. Why is she playing such a central role in this discussion? So, of course, Rashi asked the question. Remember, anytime, as we learned last time, Rashi will always explain what's going on in the verse. You read this verse, you read it quickly, it goes fine. You examine it, you'll notice a few questions. And right away, if you just saw the verse and you examined it, you would know that Rashi would answer those questions. Because Rashi is going to answer any question that's going to inhibit the understanding of the verse. Simply. The simple understanding of the verse. So Rashi says it like this. When Sarah was alive, there were miracles ever present in her tent. Miracle number one, when she would light candles on Friday afternoon for Shabbat, those candles would last till the following Shabbat. Right? Instead of the candles extinguishing 3 or 4 hours later, depending on the size of the candles, there was a miracle. It lasted for a long time, kind of echoing the miracle of Hanukkah many centuries later. Miracle number one. Miracle number two, she would make the dough for the challah. She made challah every Friday, I would assume, like for Shabbos. And she would make a little bit of dough, and she would be able to make hundreds of loaves. Remember, Abraham's house was a center of hospitality. There were always people coming and going. Our kids are taught in day school that Abraham's tent had 4 entrances, one from the north, south, east, and the west, welcoming guests from wherever they came. So you would imagine that the typical Friday night dinner in Abraham's house, there would be a lot of people there. So Sarah makes the dough, and before you know it, there's loads and loads and loads of dough. Okay, miracle number 2. And miracle number 3, there was an ever-present cloud hovering on top of the tent. 3 miracles. Sarah dies. And you know what goes with her? The miracles. And for a few years, the tent, Sarah's tent, is bereft of those miracles. So Isaac brings his new young bride. He brings her to the tent of Sarah, and he marries her. What happens? All the miracles come back. The candles lasting from Friday to Friday. There's blessing in the dough. There's a ever-present cloud hovering over the tent. Isaac realizes that Rebekah is an adequate replacement, so to speak, for his mother. She is on the same level as Sarah, the great matriarch and the founder together with Abraham of our religion and our people. He realizes that Rebekah's got the goods. She is worthy of continuing on this legacy of Abraham. And he loves her. And he's consoled after his mother. When you read the verse with the understanding that Rashi provides, we see that the love that Isaac has to Rebekah is linked to his understanding of Rebekah's character. He realizes that Rebekah is someone who's a wonderful woman. Like she's pious. She's kind. She's worthy of founding the great nation, the Jewish people, and that engenders the love. If you notice in the verse, it says that he married her before he loved her. It was only after he recognized her qualities, her virtues, only after that did he love her. Now, let's put that on the side for a little bit. In one of the institutions that I studied and I taught in Israel, Rabbi Noah Weinberg was famous for saying as follows. He was saying, love is the pleasure that you get when you recognize the virtue in another human and you identify them with those virtues. This is what he would always say. So you come to yeshiva and you learn the definition of love. Well, among a million other things. That's what he said. Love is the pleasure you get when you see the virtue, you recognize the virtue in another human being, and you identify them with those virtues, which sounds very different, I would say, than the definition, perhaps, that we could come up today if we were to take a poll in greater society. Love is the virtue, is the pleasure of the recognition of the virtue in someone else. You see someone else has good qualities, and you identify them, you associate them with those qualities. That's what love is. And for years, I was wondering, where does he pull it up? And it seems like this verse really spells it out for us, once you understand it with Rashi. Isaac identified the virtues of Rebekah. He recognized her qualities. He realized, wow, this is an amazing woman, and that's why he loved her. And indeed, this opens up the door for a repeatable formula of how we too can have love. If we recognize the good, the virtue, the qualities, the positive aspects of another human being, and we label them, we identify them, we associate them with those qualities, we'll love them. Simple as that. Now, everyone has something good about them, something bad about them. There's no perfect human being. There's no one without sin. By definition, we're here to do something, to improve, to become better people. Thus, we have something going for us, we have something going against us. Everyone's like that. And people are different because some people have strengths in certain areas and weaknesses in other areas, and other people it's the opposite. But we're all a collection of positive and negative character. That's what we all are. So essentially, the only question that exists as to whether or not I will love someone, the only question is, what will I choose to recognize from their collection, from their repertoire of positive and negative character? What am I going to choose to identify them with? For some people, of course, maybe people have a higher percentage of positive character, so it's easier to love them because there's more to love, so to speak, about them. But everyone has redeeming qualities. Right, let's put that as almost everyone. I'm preempting the question that I know everyone was asking. Almost everyone. Certainly almost every Jew, right? We have good qualities. Of course, we all have bad qualities as well. So it's possible for me to love and hate almost every human being on the planet. The question is not about them, it's about me. What am I going to zone in on in their character? Am I going to look at the fact that they're impatient? Or am I going to look at the fact that they're kind? Am I going to look at the fact that they're intelligent and capable and driven? Or am I going to look at the fact that they're quick to anger? Or, a little bit prickly? Or a little bit of a different tempo? That's the only question. The question is me, not them. If ever it's possible to love and hate almost everyone. And there's the formula that we have to follow is, it's very clear. You see someone, what are you seeking out? What are you looking for? What are you trying to draw about them to kind of identify who they are and if you're going to like them or not? If you're always looking for the positive, if you're always looking to identify, to seek out what is good, what is admirable about their character, invariably you'll find something. And if you take that thing and you label them as that, you identify them with their positive qualities, with their successes and not their failures, well, then you love them. Let's develop this idea as well. Love your fellow as yourself. How do we identify ourselves? How do we view ourselves? We view our mistakes as aberrations and our successes as what defines us. Yet, when we see someone else making a mistake, we have a tendency to label them as that. That's not their aberration, that's who they are. And maybe their successes, that's a fluke. I know who they really are, right? I've seen things. But who hasn't seen things amongst themselves? Love your fellow as yourself. Just give them the same courtesy you have to yourself. We don't view ourselves as villains. Even though we know we've done some pretty bad things. Everyone has. We've done things that we're not proud of. But what do we say? We justify it. Well, I didn't have a good night's sleep last night. I shouldn't have said that. But come on, I didn't have my coffee and there was traffic on the way to work. Right? That's very natural. And I'm not trying to say we should change that. But love your fellow as yourself. Maybe give them the same courtesy as you give yourself. Maybe when they make a mistake, you don't automatically say, whoa, where did this guy come from? Maybe you ask yourself. Maybe he also was up at the middle of the night with the crying baby, right? Or maybe he didn't have his coffee. Well, I don't care about his coffee. Well, you'd hear about your own coffee, and you're quick to justify your mistakes as aberrations because of some of their causes. Well, love your fellow as yourself. Just give them the same courtesy.
Benefit.
Same benefit of the doubt, exactly. What happens when you make a mistake? It's embarrassing. You do something, you say something, you mispronounce a word, right? It happens a lot. I had a friend of mine who was speaking in front of 400 people. Which word did he say? I think he said epitome. He said epitome, because he just read it in books, never heard someone pronounce it. If you ever want to rankle him, you just say, oh, this is the epitome. Just say that, right? And suddenly they're like, don't say that, right? But then when you mispronounce something, you're like, hope everyone forgets it. Why? Well, that's not fair. Love your fellow as yourself. Just the same way you want to be treated, treat others. That you hate, don't do to others. And like you said, you're 100% right. Judging favorably. That's an extension of this. And we'll see this theme kind of spidering into other areas. You're right. Judging favorably is an extension of this mitzvah. We could really see how Rabbi Akiva really plumbed the depths of this idea and told us this is foundational for all of Torah. Because indeed, you're right. To judge favorably, and all that comes with that, is an extension of just extending the love that you have to yourself to someone else. Now, we could view this as a series of isolated decisions, or, like Liddy mentioned, it's a switch. It's something that we have to kind of reformulate and repurpose and change about the way we deal with other people. Because by default, we notice the bad in others, that jumps out at us, and to see the good in others, right, that takes practice, that takes work. I spoke a couple of weeks ago about, it was a wedding celebration. My Chai's brother, my brother-in-law, he got married, and they have the 7 days of celebration. So it was the night after the wedding. They asked me to speak, and I said to them a story of Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz. Who's Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz? Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz was a European rabbi who was the head of one of the great institutions, the Mir Yeshiva, in Europe. And then when the entire yeshiva went to Shanghai, he was at the helm, and then ultimately in Israel as well. So he once said that he knows thousands of positive character traits about his wife. Thousands.
There's not that many character traits.
Oh, you would think so, right?
Yeah.
But he spent his prodigious intelligence with regards to his relationships as always trying to find more and more good. And he could identify thousands of different positive characteristics of his wife. Now, even if his wife was the most wonderful person on the planet, then maybe she was. She was. and she had sterling character in every facet of her behavior. Even if that was true, like you said, we have a hard time even identifying 10, but the truth is that someone's behavior, there's a whole world, and there's a lot of nuance. And unless you look for it, unless you try to seek it out, you may not even be aware of it, because that takes work. And like I said, it's a switch, because we start off, right, with, by default, seeing the negative and ignoring the good, unless it's so overwhelming. And perhaps our life goal is, one of our life's goals as Jews will be to make that switch. Perhaps we can live in a world where everyone looks out for the good, notices the good in others, and when other people make a mistake, we'll ignore it. Not ignore it if it's dangerous, of course, but ignore it. Someone said something, someone blurted something out. Let that pass, because we give ourselves the same thing. I want to go a step further here. Perhaps a step deeper is correct, more correct. Why are we biased? Why, by default, don't we give someone the same courtesy that we give ourselves? Human nature is that we treat ourselves differently than someone else, right? We are we. Like I'm connected to myself, and everyone's connected to themselves. And someone else says, well, that's not me. I am me. They're not me. And whatever is included in me is something that I am going to defend. And something I'm going to look for their betterment and try to improve. And give all these courtesies. What does it say? Love your fellow as yourself. Perhaps on a deeper level, it's telling you there's a reason why you love yourself. Whatever's included under the canopy of you is something that you love. Why don't you make a little bit of a bigger canopy and welcome others under it? Maybe if you treat others like yourself, if they were like you, well, then you would love them by default. By way of saying this in other words, instead of trying to fix, all the symptoms of the problem, change the problem itself. The reason why there is a discrepancy between the way I treat myself and the way I treat others is because I am me and they're not me. And the human psychology, for whatever reason, is that I look out for myself and others, maybe they're even a threat. Okay, so I can try to fix it with this guy and with that guy and with that guy and with that guy. But what if I just fix the problem and then the solution will happen automatically by default? What if I say, okay, you know who's me? My spouse is me. And indeed, that's very natural. That's very healthy to say that it's not just me plus you. It's we're a team. We're together. When something hurts you, it hurts me as well. And of course, that's what marriage really is about. We're taking our I, so to speak, and we're expanding it to include something beyond ourselves. And what happens when you have children? You have an expectant family. Of course, now you have to announce it all on Facebook, right? So they're about to have their first child. They're so excited. And you ask the parents, okay, you going to love your child? I would probably advise, if you're going to ask this, maybe ask the dad, not the mom. Let's assume we ask the mom. You going to love this child? Well, of course. Let's say them like this. Okay, well, is it possible? What if your child is an obnoxious brat like your neighbor's child? It's possible. You still going to love him? What are they going to say? Well, of course.
They haven't even met him yet.
They haven't even met him yet, exactly. How do you know that you're going to love them? The answer is because the child is an extension of you. You love yourself. Even the obnoxious brats love themselves.
But there are people who don't love themselves.
That's true. That's true. But healthy people love themselves.
Yes.
I would agree with 100%. And maybe perhaps we can say, if you don't love yourself, you're not capable of loving others as well. Because the Torah is telling you, you love yourself, that's a given. Now extend that to other people. If we don't love ourselves, perhaps we're not capable of loving others. But the reason why parents love even obnoxious children is because they don't view their children as something beyond themselves. They view their children, they're not even aware of this, maybe the inner workings of this, but they view their children as an extension of themselves. If your child is you, you don't need to be told to love them as yourself. They already are yourself. And the hope is that as we grow and develop spiritually, what is ourself expands and expands. And by the way, I'll tell you guys another secret here. The reason why acclimation in marriage is difficult is specifically because of this point. You live your whole life, and the thing that you defend, your turf, so to speak, is you. I've said this before, I'll say it again. The verse in Exodus 19, describes a single person as someone who comes with the edge of their clothing. Im begapo yavo, begapo yetzeh. If the Jewish slave comes with his shirt, he leaves with his shirt. Which means, if the Jewish slave comes unmarried, he leaves unmarried. Why, of all the descriptions we could possibly give to bachelor men, why would we say they come with their shirt? The answer is, in the beginning of our lives, before we include others in our world ends where our clothing ends. Everything else is not ourselves. So the first time in someone's life where they have to break their identity, crack it to create a new one, is their marriage. For a marriage to work, there has to be the pain of changing your identity. A man shall leave his father and his mother. You have to abandon something and cleave to your wife and become one flesh. What does that mean? It means you have to crack, you have to break your previous identity to form your new identity. And that's why it's difficult. And once we do that, the hope is that we'll have children, which we too will include under our own canopy, but not stop there. The great people of the Judaism, your greatness is measured by how big are you. In fact, the name that is given for a great person in Judaism is Gavra Rabbah, which means a large person, which nowadays may be construed as an insult, right? You wouldn't say to someone, you're a very large person. But in Judaism, what it means is that yourself is expanded. It's not just your body and your soul. It's your wife and your children, your neighbors, your community, the Jewish people, the entire world. Can you imagine what it's like to live in a world where the pain of anyone in the world you feel? Of course, that's something which is beyond us, right? That's the idea of Adam. Adam is incorporating it's one entity which incorporates all of humanity. But what's the idea of what's Moses? What's Jewish leadership? We had a whole talk about this. Where Moshe demonstrated this quality of the pain of all the Jews he felt. And he did everything he can to try to help others. We had a whole class on Jewish leadership. And we actually see how Rabbi Akiva's words really are so illuminating. This one mitzvah, love your fellow as yourself, really extends beyond to everywhere, every corner of Judaism. And indeed, Hillel was right. This is all of Judaism. Everything else is commentary. Everything else is fleshing this all out. It's indeed a gateway to all other gates of Jewish leadership. What does it mean to be a great leader? It means to feel the pain of others. Why would you feel the pain of others? Why would you bear the burden of someone else's suffering? Well, because it's not someone else's suffering, it's your suffering as well. I told someone recently, someone asked me a question, a student of mine. He's like, okay, if our goal is to fix the world, why are we observing Shabbos? Why don't we go to Africa and save thousands of kids? I said, well, first of all, why can't you do both? Why does it have to be a conflict? But I said, let's assume you're right. Let's assume you're right. Okay, well, let's take your assumption for granted. How much do you actually care about those kids? I said, there's been 300,000 fatalities in the Syrian war the past couple of years. Disappointing. Terrible, right? Of course. But what really upsets you more? That, or if you're in traffic on the way to work? What have you expressed more pain about? When you stubbed your toe walking out of the shower? or the fact that 300,000 people are... What have you given more expletive-laced tirades about?
Whatever you're feeling.
Right? If you really have pain, you scream out. We've been in traffic and we're like, what's going on over here? But somehow 300,000 people dying. We don't ever scream what's going on. We're like, that's terrible. We get on a high horse, right? Oh, it's so terrible. But does it really cause us more pain than something minor happening to us? The groan, the collective groan that happens on an airplane when the pilot says, okay, the engineer's coming. We're not sure. We have to check something. It'll be 45 minutes here in LaGuardia. We're like, And everyone's like, oh, man. It's like 45 minutes, okay. But what do we actually feel when someone else has pain? And the pain can be much greater. It's like, that's really sad. It's really sad, And the reason why? If there's human pain, it should be painful. Regardless of who the human is, the answer is we feel our pain. The question is, what's us? Who is me? Right? Who is as myself? Who did I include under this umbrella, under this canopy? That's myself as well. And the leaders of the people are the ones that they include many, many, many other people, self beyond themselves. That defines a Jewish leader. Kindness. Kindness we talked about as a foundational quality that really brings us to all other qualities. Well, what happens if you love others? What happens? You notice what's going on with them. We notice what's going on with ourselves, right? Everything that goes on to us, that happens to us, we notice. Well, what happens to other people? Sometimes we don't even notice. We don't notice when someone else is going through something. Why? Because that's beyond us. But what if it wasn't beyond us? We wouldn't ignore other people. We'd feel what they're going through, and if we really care about them, we'll try to help to improve their situation.
So,
go ahead.
Maybe you're going there, but if I cut myself and I hurt, I know I can put a Band-Aid on it and it'll be better. I can't put a Band-Aid on Syria.
True. That
I don't know what to do, so I'm like...
That's true.
stuck.
That's true. And I just brought this as an
Even
example.
A little bit, I don't know what to do.
Okay. But the question is, how much does it actually bother us? Of course it bothers us. As humans, it should bother us. But does it compare to any minor inconvenience that we have in our lives? Of course it's worse. Everyone agrees that it's worse. But what causes me more pain?
So that's the...
I'm just saying, there's a long way for us to go till we care about all of...
Exactly. I wrestle with that.
Yeah, and it's... To us, we're like, am I really that bad of a human being? Of course we care about that. But really, how much do we care?
No,
We care about it kind of like theoretically almost.
It's a resiliency of human mind. Otherwise, if you would lose your sleep over everything that's going on in the world, you would just go mad.
Well, or you'd be a great leader. So even if it's not everything in the world, I don't know. That's like Adam level. But what about everything that goes on in your neighborhood, or everything that goes on in your community? Someone comes to you and says, "Okay, I need a job." Okay, well, so you say, "Oh, who can I call?" Right? But if your child needed a job, or if you needed a job, how would you behave? Try to behave the same way as if they're you. It means, of course, this scales. I want to look at Abraham here for a second. Abraham is someone who displays greatness in different areas of life. Abraham, of course, is history's greatest disseminator of monotheism, and history's also greatest paragon of kindness. Right? We're told the stories of Abraham's kindness, and it seems hyperbolic. And the question is this just a coincidence? Is it just a coincidence that he happened to be very good at a lot of different things? Or perhaps they're related? I would say that his love of others, the fact that he included so many other people in his proverbial canopy, that propelled him to try to show them, truth in their lives, to try to help them have more meaning in their lives. It was connected. It wasn't just, it was disparate. Because he cared about so many other people, that caused him to try to help them, become have a more meaningful life. Happiness. What distinguishes happy people from unhappy people? It's not circumstances. Certainly not circumstances. Because circumstances depend upon how you relate to those circumstances. The question of happiness is the question of, are you going to find good in a situation, or are you going to find bad in a situation? Right? We already have enough good in our lives to make us happy. The question is, are we going to focus on what we have, and that brings us joy and happiness and delight, or are we going to look at what we don't have, and then no matter what we have, we'll still feel lacking? Character, of course, we spoke about this already earlier. So I'm just giving you a list of examples of how this idea spreads to other areas of life. And indeed, when Rabbi Akiva says to us, this is a foundational element of Torah, it really does disseminate. It does proliferate and into other areas of Jewish life. Indeed, to conclude this segment, learning to love others can be reasonably commanded by the Torah, especially because the Torah also shows you how to actually do it. It teaches you the formula. And the formula is, if you want to love others, you got to find the good in them. Well, how do you find the good in them? You seek it out. Step 1. Step 2, which is really the kind of what would happen by default, is that, well, you have to love them as yourself. Give them the same courtesy. Don't do to others that you don't want to be done to yourself. And ultimately, once they're included in who you are, once they're actually yourself, they're as yourself, it's because I love myself, and thus I love whatever is included in myself. If you can extend your humanity, your you, into other people, which is going to happen, it's going to be foisted upon us if we want to have a happy marriage and with children. Once we break out of the shell, out of the cage that inhibits us from loving others as ourselves, it becomes dramatically easier to include others under that canopy. What about
You can't just pick the Jews. You have to pick everybody.
Well, ultimately, it's for all of humanity. I would say,
right? He says it everybody, and then he says.
Well, I would say you probably start at home. You start probably the first thing you do is you got to love yourself, right? Most of us hopefully will love ourselves already, but you start with your spouse, and you start with your kids, and you move to your neighbor, and to your community, and ultimately you want to love the entire world. I would still say maybe you start with the Jewish people, or at least your Jewish community. You start from what is most, what's easiest to do. That you already have an affinity towards is easier to include them in your world. Right? I would say for sure you start with your spouse, and then your children, and then your community, and you move out.
That doesn't sound weird. I sometimes maybe some people are crying out for more loving than others, or I'm dealing with suffering. I feel compassion for people who are suffering more than people who are succeeding in life.
Yeah, well, that's very natural to feel. It's very natural to feel compassion and care and concern for those that need it, of course.
But you never
That's
really
very
know.
that's very natural.
But you never really know that person who's succeeding.
They may have other things going for them as well. Yeah. Okay, what about the convert? So what are we told? We're told you got to love the convert. You got to love the convert. You got to love the foreigner because you too are foreigners in the foreign land. So we already know that we need to love the convert. That he is already included in the original mitzvah. So I think a few ways to answer this. I think the simple answer is that we have to overcompensate for someone that we would have a tendency to have a harder time loving. Someone looks a little different, they act a little different, they speak a little different background. They're not really sure how to do things. They're newcomers, and we have a tendency towards kind of being, being tribal, and to include others maybe a little bit different is harder. So perhaps the Torah is trying to overcompensate for those people that we may have a difficult time loving But perhaps there's a different approach here. And this really is continuing in the process that we have outlined thus far. Perhaps what the Torah is telling us, it's a way to do it. Remember, we're told, you love the convert because you yourself were. What does it matter? Love the convert. Stop there. Period. End of story. Torah doesn't say love your fellow because whatever reason. It doesn't give us a reason. Why in one mitzvah are we told love your fellow as yourself? No reason is given. Another mitzvah, love the convert because I'll tell you the reason. You were converts, land of Egypt, and therefore, perhaps what the Torah is really telling us here is a way to love someone. It's not just a mitzvah, it's also a method. We were foreigners. We were once the person who was a little bit different. We were once the outsiders. And now we see an outsider. How do we connect to them? How do we love them despite having an uphill battle? Perhaps what the Torah is telling us, we have to identify with them. Love them because you were once like that as well. And this too would be an extension of love your fellow as yourself. Find commonalities between you and a person that you want to love. Find an overlap. Find grounds for love by identifying with them, by empathizing with them, by feeling what they're going through. We all know the feeling of being the odd man out, of being by a party where we don't really know anyone and we kind of feel awkward, or being in a new environment, in a new school, or in a new company, or a new business, or in a new synagogue or community, or whatever, and we feel a little bit different, and we're not quite sure how things are done. And we know that's not comfortable. And what happens when we're on the other side of the fence? And we see the newcomer walking in. And we see that they're looking a little goofy and a little awkward. And we see that, if we love them as ourselves, we remember we too were once like that. You were also once a foreigner in a foreign land. You also once had to go through the pain, the discomfort that this person's doing. Identify with that. If you look at others and you find common ground between your life experience and their life experience, that will foster love between the two of you as well. Indeed, that's an extension of love your fellow as yourself. So I think this can be also understood as another method to achieve this love, which seems to be so difficult for us to, in today's world. Perhaps maybe a way to include someone in your world would be to say, okay, what are they going through? Oh, they're an outsider? Did I ever experience that myself? And naturally, we feel a tendency, or we feel an affinity towards those who have experienced what we went through. And thus, we can find common ground and maybe include them under our canopy, yes?
Where does it end in the Torah? I don't care if Hitler loved dogs, and I don't care about all the
Yes, of course. Yes, we don't love sinners. We certainly don't love murderers. We show zero compassion. There's certain people we show zero compassion for. People that murderers, I would certainly fall under those category. Enemies of the Jewish people. We don't love Arafat or certainly not Hitler, of course.
But there's like in Perkei Avot, there's like I'm gonna read some stuff today. Like he's talking about like all the positive qualities of a thief. He's like persistent, he plans. It's just like it's a thief, but he like lists all these like positive character traits.
Well, and I'll tell you something even a little bit more radical. I'll say that, if we have to admire the precision and the commitment of the Nazis. If we did anything as efficiently as they did, we'd probably be more successful at that. So does that sound heretical? I don't know. Maybe it sounds bizarre. Like it sounds difficult. It's difficult for the ears to hear those words. But we have I'll say this, maybe this is a little offensive. I don't think it is, but I've heard it from people that went through the Holocaust themselves, and they say that we're facing a spiritual Holocaust in today's Jewish world, especially in America. I think it's not hard to say. Well, we have millions of Jews in America that are very distant from Judaism. So certainly they're not being rounded up and tortured and killed and murdered brutally, but there's a certain element of a Holocaust where there's vast numbers of people that are being disassociated from Judaism. I heard my grandfather say that, and he suffered tremendously through the Holocaust. So I feel like I can say that as well. But maybe we have to also look at methods that are unconventional. I know Rabbi Weinberg, there's a Torah, famous Torah, aforementioned Rabbi Weinberg, they went to Auschwitz. And they had teams, like they had 100 rabbis going together at Auschwitz. And he said, look at this, they were constantly improving their methods. Of course, the members of their barbaric methods, their heinous methods. But they said it's not efficient to use one bullet. So who wants to use one bullet? You have to come up with this gas and that gas and this shit and that, and this subterfuge. And maybe we have to do that with the good. Let's take the methods and use that for good. We're trying to teach the world about morality, teach the world about God, teach the world about Torah, teach the Jewish people about Torah. To do that, we have to constantly be tweaking and improving and be relentless in those pursuits. Does that mean that we love the Nazis? Of course not.
I mean, Hitler was obviously a very persuasive speaker. So when he was a Torah scholar, there was that persuasive speaker.
But one of the examples, for instance, Israeli Air Force 1947, a lot of older planes that have the German made from Luftwaffe.
Yeah.
They were used in the war of 1947, 49.
Yeah, but I'm saying, but we want to be very careful to say that we, of course,
It doesn't mean that
those are not people that we love,
Luftwaffe.
but we look for how we improve our life, the life of the Jewish people in the world at large, and we look even towards bad people, evil people as well. But yes, to answer your question, Debbie, we do not love murderers. Absolutely not. We show zero compassion for them. Nothing. Absolutely not. We don't love rapists. Absolutely not. No compassion, no love for them whatsoever.
But once they're convicted, right? No, not accused.
Oh, of course, yes. Everyone deserves. And by the way, that idea is a Jewish idea. The idea of equality under law is in Judaism is 3,500 years old, and in contemporary society, it's very recent. The idea of getting a fair trial, a fair jury, justice. But yes, of course, there should be justice for everyone. But someone who is a rapist, someone who's a murderer, someone who's a terrible person, we show zero compassion. And by the way, you know who's included under that? It's a verse in the Torah. The Torah talks about a masis. A masis is a spiritual murderer. He's someone who tries to rally the troops away from God and away from Torah and away from morality. Those people, the Torah says, we show no compassion for. It's actually a verse in the Torah. No compassion. Do not have compassion, do not empathize with them, do not have mercy in them. And there are even laws, judicial process laws, procedural laws, that are waived for those kinds of people because we realize the danger that they can bring about is no less, in fact, it's even worse than physical torment that can be promulgated.
So it's like heretics in medieval Christianity, who were this big.
Maybe. I wouldn't say it's heretics. It's heretics that go public, that try to, like I think we could talk about the Messianic Jews in northern Israel, for example, or even in the United States. There's a lot of it. The people that try to dupe the uninformed, and they have a church, but they cover it with Stars of David, and they have all these Hebrew letters, and they call it a synagogue, but it's a church. Some people like that, that they're trying deliberately to dupe the uninitiated into abandoning Judaism, like that. We show no compassion for those people. Absolutely not. So yes, there are exceptions, of course. What about the last thing? Love God. And like we said, it's difficult for us to understand God, to comprehend God, to define God, to fathom, of course, what that means. But why is it difficult? We mentioned earlier, the reason why it's difficult is because it's beyond our comprehension. There are realities that to us are fixed, that are immutable, that cannot be tweaked or changed. And God is beyond that. And that's by design. That we are incapable of comprehending God. However, the ultimate goal of Judaism is, like we said, tikkun olam, to fix the world. Well, we spoke about this previously, but to fix the world, the fundamental flaw that causes the world to be in need of fixing is the fact that the world does not recognize God. That is the one thing that solves all other problems. You fix that, and by default, by extension, everything else gets fixed. So the goal of our nation, the mission, the destiny of the Jewish people is to bring the world to understanding, to acceptance of God. Not only that, there are ways for us to understand God even if we can't truly grasp what that means. And I'll explain that in a little bit. We have a Torah. We have mitzvahs. And we have God's world. We look at the world. 1 trillion different species they discovered is the number this week. And we think about how vast that number is. It's a trillion. It rhymes with a billion and a million, but really it's just beyond what we could even fathom besides that number. And there's 1 trillion distinct species in the world. What does that tell us about the creator of the world? It gives us a certain sense of awe when we understand just how vast this universe is. When we probe into the inner workings of what this world is composed of. When we marvel at the wonder that is the human body. How everything works so perfectly. You eat food, and just automatically there's factories within you breaking it all down and sending it to wherever it needs to go and digesting it and taking the waste and removing it. And the fact that your heart's pumping 89,000 times a day without being instructed to do so, without anyone that we know programming it. It's all the Almighty just working for us, even when we're sleeping. And you look at a tiny little bug and how it's so perfect. It's so ergonomically, pristine. Everything works so perfectly. And you can imagine any engineer at NASA trying to replicate that. Not only that, that's self-replicating. You take a seed and you throw it on the ground. And you keep it there for 6 months and you water it. And something new sprouts out. And before you know it, you have a tree with more apples. And where does this come from? Is the soil edible? No. Is the seed edible? No. Where does this come from? It's a miracle that happens every day and we take for granted. And you eat the apple, and you know what you get? You get a coupon for another tree. Where does this come from? This is miracles that we live and experience every day, and we ignore. But if we spend time thinking and dwelling and probing and analyzing and pondering this, and we really examine and we get into the nitty-gritty, and we learn about just how the ants are all finding the way to the Oreo cookie, and how the fact that these tiny ants, so small, everything works so perfect, and they're all working in unison. And they discovered that there's a chemical that the original ant who discovers the cookie drops along the way. And then every ant has the ability to drop this little chemical along the way, organ number 1. Organ number 2, they have the sense to follow it. And they have the brains to do that. All in this tiny little speck. Where does that come from? It's just the handiwork of God. It's everywhere around us. And while we cannot understand God himself And that idea, the theological ideas, is very hard for us to understand. We see his handiwork. And we can really connect to God via his handiwork. Once we recognize how wonderful it is and how ludicrous it is to say that this all happened on itself. It's just ludicrous, preposterous. A trillion species, you only have 3.5 billion years. Do the math. Work it out for me. Right? I give you all the licenses to do it. Just work it out for me. What happened? What happened and what happened next? How do we start with inanimate matter and get to where we are today with a trillion species? Just do the math. In 3.5 billion years. It's not possible. It's preposterous. We like it because it gives us comfort. Well, maybe God doesn't exist and we're safe, even though that might be all subconscious. But that's what our society does, and there's always going to be an alternative. But if we actually just examine this and we see, wow, like what a world. The fact that I'm not even thinking, I'm just talking, right? Well, I am thinking a little bit, right? But I'm not thinking about talking. And I'm able to create these sounds that we can't even quantify. And I just know automatically how to move my lips and my tongue and my mouth and my guttural and my teeth and my lips and everything and you guys are able to interpret it because you know why? Because there's sound barriers that are going into your ear that go in your ears. There's this little spiral, little bone that has fluid in it, and by the different sounds that I make with my mouth, your ears are interpreting it by the tiny microscopic hairs and how they swish and how they sway depending on the different vibrations of those fluids in that bone in your ear. And that sends messages to your brains, and you understand what I'm saying. All that happened by itself? Really? And you're like, wow, what a world. It's as if the Almighty, this maybe a little bit of a poor way of saying, dropped all these little Easter eggs out there, right? Where you discover him even though you discover his handiwork. It's like an extension of God, so to speak. Obviously not a literal extension. But God put these things out there for us to discover, and through that, develop a relationship with him. So yes, we may never be able to theologically connect to him, or maybe there are ways to do that as well. But we have a whole world of his handiwork that's right there, ripe for us to understand and to gain an appreciation.
Off track, this is off track, I know, but you don't have to touch it if it is bad. You once talked about blessings, everyday blessings, like 100 blessings. With those little things that you just enumerated on become part of the blessings?
So you're right. So that is on topic. We have mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are God's instructions. If I told you I have instructions from the manufacturer how to change your oil, right? The manufacturer knows the best practices for the maintaining of your vehicle. So you want to listen to the manufacturer's instructions. The mitzvahs are the manufacturer's instructions for how to maintain, how to improve, how to develop, how to nurture the product, which is us. And you learn about mitzvahs and their role and how perfect they are, and how if you were to study the book written in the 16th century that tells of the 248 different limbs and the 248 corresponding mitzvahs and which limb corresponds to which mitzvah. And you see how with the observance of the mitzvahs, we are creating this spiritual replica of ourselves, which is going to be our spiritual existence, our spiritual body, if that doesn't make any sense, but just as a way of understanding it. That's our spiritual existence that is going to be us in the spiritual world. So it's as if we are building our human with every one of these 248 mitzvahs. And you see how it all how it all connects and all fits, and how it's all so far ahead of its time. How we have mitzvahs that 3,000 years ago people must have thought was bizarre because it was so different than the conventional wisdom of the time. and society turns the corner, and finally they get around, the greater world gets around to things that we knew thousands of years ago. I always say this, I always talk about this. Now, in the 60s, the scientific world finally proved the very first word of the Torah. Once they were able to quantify the fact that the world is expanding, the idea of a static world that doesn't change became ludicrous. A world that was always in existence and will always continue to be in existence, that's not developing or changing, right, that was scrapped. Essentially, science finally got, after thousands of years, to agree to the very first word of the Torah, Bereshis, that was beginning. This is a process. But you see how the Torah is just so far ahead of its time. And there are things that we say today, well, I don't know, man, the Torah is saying things here that our society doesn't agree with, right? It's inhumane to give people lashes for sins. Well, is it inhumane to send people to 30 years in prison? Is that rehabilitation? Did people get rehabilitated? The fact that we have mass incarcerations in this country, and what we actually gain from is very, very minimal. Well, we do gain to remove some violent criminals from the streets, but the fact that 95% of felonies that are felony offenders that are released end up being incarcerated for another felony soon afterwards. So obviously our system doesn't work. And you go to Singapore, where they have a system which is kind of similar to the system the Torah outlines. And you know what? If someone drops that's maybe a bit excessive, but then piece of gum on the floor, they give him, they cane him. But you know what? No one drops pieces of gum on the floor. It obviously works. It works. It's a system that works. So, but we say, no, we know what's best for someone. We know that putting someone in a box and keeping them for 30 years, that's best for humanity. It's best for them. That's rehabilitation. It's not rehabilitation. You beat him to a bloody pulp and let him go. And you know what? He'll be rehabilitated, and then there'll be 30 years of productivity, of crime-free productivity from that person. It'll be better for them, it'll be better for society, it's cheaper. You don't have to spend $60,000 a year per federal inmate. It makes sense. But no, this is wrong. It's immoral. What do we know about immoral? Isn't that immoral to keep someone in the box? I have a better option. Give people the option. You can either choose to have 30 lashes or 30 years in prison. How is that immoral? You know what are the inmates going to choose? They'll choose the lashes.
The option, grounding or spanking. It's like, let's go. It's making it work.
Right? What are you going to choose?
A couple of months ago, I read an article in some newspaper that talked about that and said the same thing.
Let people choose. How is that inhumane? What happened to all the pro-choice people?
They're having a big argument.
What happened to where's the pro-choice? I want pro-choice in incarceration. I want pro-choice with regards to incarceration. Let people choose, do they want to be caned or to be incarcerated?
Are we even still on topic of three loves?
No.
Yeah,
I didn't
we are.
go this way, but you really didn't answer my question.
Well,
but
and
I'll ask you afterwards.
Okay,
No problem.
but I think mitzvahs, right, is another way that we can love God. This is how we got to it. And we see how the mitzvahs, they make sense, they're logical, they're ahead of their times, and we really, if we delve into it, we see how they build a world for us, a spiritual world, brick by brick. We're creating a spiritual world. Of course, that was a rant about the incarceration, even though I stand by every word I said.
Even the ones that don't make any sense.
Well, and the idea of us having a recognition that, okay, so I would disagree with your question, not that they don't make sense, they don't make sense to us.
Right.
The idea, the humility of saying there are things that I don't know. Remember, we learned about Rashi last time. Rashi says, a very important Rashi, my dad says, right? Very important Rashi is I don't know what this means. The Talmud says very clearly, Book of Brachos, L'olam yardel adam lomar, a person should always regulate themselves to saying, Eini yodeh, I don't know. Isn't that a lesson as well, to know that there are some things you don't know? Isn't the lesson of I don't know those words being a very good answer to a question?
It's how you love. It's how you can love a spouse. A spouse will ask me to do something that doesn't make any sense, but I do it.
I talk about flowers, buying flowers, right? Doesn't make any sense for men. It's like the gold. It's like the red heifer. It's the same thing. You do it because you're instructed to do it. That's what's right to do, and then you don't understand it. That's a very healthy way to live life. Sometimes you don't know
So I
things.
was explaining to Elsie why I used the razor instead of or I used electric razor instead of.
Yeah.
Because I'm not supposed to do that. You
Yeah.
don't want me to, so.
Yeah.
How we.
And that's fine.
Tangible way of loving God.
And that's fine. And by the way, there's things in our society that are like that as well. It's as if our society, suddenly, everything makes sense. Now, a lot of things don't make sense. And we do them anyhow. Because that's just the way, that's the way life is. Not everything is our micro-brain able to fathom with regards to what God wants us from us. And lastly, we have Torah. Torah is God's mind. And we, unfortunately, our society or our education sometimes, what did Mark Twain say? He doesn't let his schooling interfere with his education, right? You don't want your schooling to interfere with education. And that happens a lot, where our schooling interferes with our Jewish education. Because in the school, we're told very rudimentary Judaism as kids. And then we kind of fixate on that, and we assume that that's all there is. What else could possibly exist out there? And yet, we've spoken about Torah as Torah being like as vast as the ocean. But you know what? I was in the Pacific Ocean, and it was up to my ankles. It was up to my ankles. It was in Venice Beach, California. It's up to my ankles. This is not a very deep ocean. And you know what? If you just stand on the outskirts, on the fringes, on the valences of Torah, and you just dip your toe and you're like, this is all there is. And the further you go in, the more you realize how deep it is. So indeed, the Torah is like that. That the more you study and the more you plumb into the depths of Torah, the more you submerge yourself into Torah, the more you realize how little you know. Thus, we have this ironic reality wherein a 13-year-old kid who just finished his bar mitzvah studies thinks he's exhausted everything. They are confident that they know everything they would ever need to know about Torah. Yet the people that spend 12 hours a day or 18 hours a day for 75 years studying Torah, they feel like they know nothing. And Rabbi Akiva could say, I'm nothing more than a shepherd of small animals in my knowledge of Torah. Well, Rabbi Akiva knew more Torah than anyone of his generation. The Torah that we have today is all what we studied from Rabbi Akiva and his students. How is that possible? The answer is because the more you know, the more you realize how little you know. And when we put ourselves in that world, we see the vastness of God's Torah, or God's mitzvahs, or God's handiwork, we gain an appreciation of God himself. Like we said, we recognize the goodness in other people, we love them. We recognize the greatness, the vastness, the goodness of God, we love him. It's the same formula. How do you love someone? By identifying them with their qualities, by discovering their qualities. It's the same process with God. Unfortunately, the same malady that makes it difficult for us to love our fellow man, that we notice the bad and we ignore the good, we give to God as well. When something bad happens, we start questioning God. Why did this thing happen to me? And where is God? But when something good happens, we say, oh, that's me. That's my might of my hand. I'm so brilliant. Genius. We have to flip the switch there. And you said blessings is a great example. We're supposed to do 100 blessings a day. What is a blessing? A blessing is a recognition of the fact that God loves us and cares for us and is good to us. That's what a blessing is. We do that 100 times a day because if we don't do that persistently, we're likely to fall into the pattern of noticing the bad that God does, or the perceived bad that God does, and ignoring the good that God does. Just like we have with other people. Indeed, following the mitzvahs, they provide us the opportunities, blessings is a great example of that, to discover the good that God does for us. And in conclusion, just to recap here, we indeed in the Torah, we find a method, a formula, a process by which we can love our fellows and ourselves. Of course, it doesn't include all fellows, not everyone. We're talking about the most people. Because most people are a collection of good and bad. That's the reality. That's the way we are. Thus, the choice is mine as to what I want to identify, what do I want to discover, what do I want to seek out, what do I want to recognize in the other person's character. It could be the good qualities, the things that are admirable, the things that I should learn and use it to improve myself, the things that I can do to fulfill what Pirkei Avot tells us, who is the wise person, he who learns from everyone. Shouldn't it say, who is the wise person? He who learns from people that know more than him, or people that are greater than him? Why are you learning from everyone? The answer is that everyone has something, some area where you can learn from. Thus, the wise person is indeed someone who recognizes the good in other people, because he's the one who learns from everyone, even the people that are in totality, in aggregate, worse than he is. Even those people have something to teach you. Indeed, that's another extension of this idea. And we see how Rabbi Akiva could say this is a critical element of Judaism. This is a foundational point of Torah, because this brings us everywhere we need to go in Torah. How do we do that? We look for the good in others. We seek out the good for others. And when we find that, we label them with that and not with their mistake. Love them as ourselves. Give them the same courtesy that we give ourselves, to ignore sometimes the mistakes and kind of hype the successes. Another method is to try to find common ground, to identify with them, to empathize with them, to feel like we have had common experience, to know what it's like to go through the difficult thing that they may be going through, to love them, to love the convert, because you too were a convert or a foreigner in a foreign land. And this principle indeed extends to loving God, wherein we discover the good that God does for us and the grandeur of God's world and the wonderful things that he provides us in the form of Torah, in the form of, like we do with the blessings every day, the fact that he feeds us for free, the fact that all of us are only living because the Almighty allows vegetation to happen. I have no idea, how does it even work? How does the inedible, mixed with other inedible, sprayed with a third inedible, provide food? I have no idea how it would even work. I have no idea. It's all a mystery to me. But without that, we're all dead. We're all living in the good graces of the Almighty. Thank him. Isn't that lovely?
And animals that feed
the
goodness of the earth, the grass that...
Yeah, where does the grass come from? The animals eat the grass, we eat the animals, right? That stops happening, we're all toast.
No, we're vegetarian.
Yeah, well, I mean, the only people that survive are the ones that have, are those guys who have the bug-out badge and, the Y2K people with 10,000 cans of, of food in their basement. But, it's...
So hard on us, Rabbi. I fell for that myself. I built a whole big shed about it. I was getting ready for 12 people to come out and live with us.
Not getting hard on you, but that's the reality. And indeed, if we follow these principles, not only can it help us in our own relationships, it's how we love our spouses, it's how we love our children, it's why we love our spouses and why we love our children. It'll help us, it's wonderful to live in a world where people are fantastic, where people are really lovely. Isn't that a nice world to live in? We choose which world we want to live in. Some people, if they notice the bad and they label people with the bad, everyone around them is just bad people. And the other guy lives in the same neighborhood, and everyone around them is wonderful people. Isn't that a better neighborhood to live in? Isn't that a better life to live? It's our choice what we do. It's our choice if we're going to... Of course, that's not everyone. Let's not take this to its extreme. But most people have good about them, and thus our life could be dramatically improved by this. And indeed, to get back to where we started, it's remarkable that the Torah, 3,500 years ago, just spells it out. How we can have fantastic lives and happiness and joy and kindness and leadership and all those things and wisdom. All that just spells it out. And like our study, love, I know what love is. I'll tell you. And then 4 or 5 divorces later, maybe you didn't have the secret. Is that possible? And I usually find the people with the most relationship fails are the ones that are the quickest to try to give advice, right? They're the experts because they've gone through it all. They're the experts. Why are they the experts? Those people should not be given the microphone of telling us how to make relationships work. It's so bizarre. But that's what our society does. Either way, it's nice to know that we could go back in time to indeed go ahead in progress in our lives. I thank you all for listening and look forward to seeing you all next week. A lot of fun.
Thank you, Rabbi.
What's the topic next week?
What's the topic? Oh, the Shabbat prayers.
Yes.
Very exciting.
Ah,